You can love your father and still hate the way he makes you feel. You can crave his approval even after he's made it clear you'll never earn it. And sometimes, the person who raised you can become a stranger in a single cruel moment. The night of my cousin's wedding was supposed to be joyful, music, laughter, family. But it was also the night my father reminded me that to him, I was still the disappointment who never measured up. My name is Emily Reeves, and my father, Colonel Thomas Reeves, has spent his life commanding respect. From his soldiers, from his peers, from his family, especially from me. He used to wear his service like armor, polished metals, perfect posture, the kind of man who carried silence like a weapon. Growing up, I thought love sounded like lectures and looked like cold nods of approval. But at that wedding, in front of 200 people, he stripped even that away. I remember walking into the reception hall, feeling good for once. I'd spent hours getting ready, a navy blue dress that matched my eyes, hair pinned up, heels just high enough to make me feel like I belonged. My brother's wedding, my family's moment. I wanted to be proud. But when my father saw me across the room, his expression froze. Then, with a faint smirk, he muttered just loud enough for the table to hear, "Guess even combat boots would have been an improvement." Laughter. From his friends. His old army buddies. The men who still called him sir even though the war ended years ago. I felt the burn climb up my throat as I sat down, pretending not to care. But inside, I was 12 again, back in that kitchen where he called me soft, unfit, not tough enough to carry his name. My brother, Mark, leaned over. "Ignore him, Em. He's just being dad." "That's the problem," I whispered. Dinner dragged on in a blur of speeches and clinking glasses. My father drank, laughed too loudly, told the same war stories he always told, the ones where he was always the hero, the savior, the man who never made mistakes. Then came the toast. The best man, a tall, quiet guy I hadn't met before, stood up to speak. He introduced himself as Liam Hayes, my brother's college roommate. His voice was steady, calm, almost too formal for a wedding. "I met Mark in college," he said, raising his glass, "but before that I served." A ripple of interest moved through the room. My father straightened in his seat. "What branch?" he called out. "Army," Liam replied. "Special Forces. Retired now." Dad nodded approvingly. "Good man," he said. Liam smiled faintly. "Actually, I wanted to dedicate this toast to someone else tonight. Someone who served when no one was watching. Someone who taught me what leadership really looks like." I looked up, curious. But then his eyes met mine. My heart stopped. "Lieutenant Reeves," he said softly, raising his glass. "It's an honor." The room went dead silent. My father froze mid-sip, his wine glass halfway to his mouth. "What did you just call her?" he asked, his voice tight. Liam turned to him. "Lieutenant Emily Reeves, sir. 22nd Logistics Battalion. We served on the same base 2 years ago. She was one of the finest officers I ever worked with." The color drained from my father's face. His hand trembled, wine spilling down the side of his glass as he set it down too hard. "You're joking," he said, looking at me as though he didn't recognize me at all. "You served." I met his eyes across the table, my voice steady. "Yes, Dad. I did." The room buzzed with whispers, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. For the first time in my life, the man who'd never been speechless in his entire career couldn't find a single word to say. And for the first time, I didn't need him to. The silence that followed was suffocating. Forks stopped midair, glasses hovered between hands, and every head turned toward me. For years, I had dreamed of being seen by my father, just not like this. He blinked, searching for words, his voice low but trembling. "You joined the army?" "Yes," I said, my voice calm. 2 years ago. "I finished officer candidate school last spring." He laughed once, a bitter, disbelieving sound. "You? You can't be serious." Liam's gaze cut across the table. "Colonel, with respect, she's one of the best officers I've ever met. She led our logistics unit through one of the toughest deployment rotations we had." My father looked from him to me, eyes narrowing. "You never told me." "You never asked," I replied. The words hung between us like glass shards. He sat back, staring at me as if trying to solve a riddle that didn't fit the man he thought he was. Around us, people murmured awkwardly, pretending to focus on their food. My mother touched his arm. Tom, maybe not here, but he shook her off, still locked on me. Why would you hide something like that? Because I knew you'd find a way to make it about you, I said quietly. You'd think I did it to impress you, or to fix something you broke. His face flushed red. You're damn right it's about me. I gave 20 years of my life to that uniform. You think you can just put it on like a costume? I leaned forward, my voice shaking now. It's not a costume. It's who I am. The room was still again, the air thick with things we'd never said. My brother stood up, trying to defuse it. Let's finish dinner, okay? It's my wedding. But it was too late. The damage was done. I excused myself and slipped outside into the cool night, heels sinking slightly into the damp grass. The music from inside muffled into something distant, almost haunting. A few minutes later, the door opened behind me. It was Liam. He walked up quietly, hands in his pockets. You okay? I let out a shaky breath. Not really. He nodded, eyes soft. I shouldn't have said anything. I thought he knew. I shook my head. No, you didn't do anything wrong. I just spent my whole life trying to prove to him that I wasn't weak. And the one thing that finally might have made him proud just made him angry. Liam was quiet for a long time before saying, sometimes pride looks a lot like fear. Maybe he's not angry you served. Maybe he's scared he never saw who you really are. His words hit harder than I expected. Inside, laughter erupted again. Someone had restarted the music. Through the window, I could see my father sitting stiffly, staring at nothing. My mother was talking to him, her hand resting on his arm, but he didn't respond. He looked smaller somehow, like the man who always towered over me had suddenly deflated. I didn't go back inside. Not right away. I stayed under the stars until my heart stopped pounding, until the cold settled into my skin and I could finally think. When I went home that night, I found an envelope sitting on my doorstep. My name was scrawled across it in my father's sharp handwriting. Inside, there was a single line on a folded napkin, probably from the reception table. I didn't know. I should have. No signature. No apology. Just that. I sat on the porch, reading those 5 words over and over until the tears came, quiet, uncontrollable, years overdue. Because maybe, for the first time in my life, my father wasn't trying to be a colonel. He was just trying to be my dad. The next morning, the house was still. I could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the soft creak of the floorboards as I moved toward the kitchen. My father was already there, sitting at the table in his old army t-shirt, a mug of coffee cooling in front of him. He looked up when I entered, but said nothing. For a moment, I just stood there. It felt strange, seeing him without his armor, no pressed shirt, no command in his posture. Just a man who looked tired, older than I remembered. I cleared my throat. You left me a note. He nodded. Didn't think you'd want to talk. I didn't, I said. But I came anyway. He gave a small, humorless smile. You always were stubborn. I sat across from him. The sunlight caught the lines in his face, the ones I used to think were strength. Now I saw his scars. Why'd you react like that last night? He stared into his coffee. Because you scared me. That wasn't the answer I expected. He leaned back, rubbing a hand across his jaw. When you were a kid, I used to think you were too gentle for this world. Too much like your mother. I told myself the military would eat you alive. So you mocked me? I asked, my voice rising. That was your plan? Humiliate me so I'd stay small. His eyes flashed with guilt. I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you to end up like the soldiers I trained, broken, lost, carrying ghosts. I buried too many of them, Emily. I didn't want to bury you too. The silence that followed was heavy. I'd imagined anger, pride, disappointment, but never fear. I can take care of myself, I said softly. He met my eyes. I know that now. For the first time, I believed he meant it. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the backyard, the same place he used to teach my brother how to throw a baseball. I remembered standing there as a kid, waiting for my turn, waiting for his approval. You know, he said quietly, when I left the army, I thought I'd earned peace. But I didn't. I brought the war home. I pushed it onto everyone around me, especially you. He turned back toward me, and there was something different in his eyes. Not the commanding officer I grew up with, but a man finally seeing what his uniform had cost. I'm proud of you, Em, he said. You did something I couldn't. You found purpose without losing yourself. My chest tightened. That's all I ever wanted to hear. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, faded patch. The edges were frayed, the colors dull from years of wear. This was mine, he said. 101st Airborne. I carried it through 2 tours. I kept it because it reminded me who I was before I became the man who forgot how to feel. He set it on the table in front of me. It's yours now. I stared at it, my hands trembling as I picked it up. The fabric was rough against my skin, heavy with memory. I don't deserve this, I whispered. He shook his head. You earned it. And maybe it's time I stopped trying to define what that means. The air between us felt different, softer, lighter somehow. He sat back down, and for the first time in my life, we didn't talk as soldier and superior, or even father and daughter. We just talked. About the people we lost. The things we missed. The versions of ourselves we were still learning to forgive. Hours later, when I finally stood to leave, he said, Emily. Yeah. His voice was quiet, but steady. Next time someone salutes you, don't downplay it. You earned that too. I smiled, a tear slipping down my cheek. I learned from the best. As I walked to the door, I looked back at him, still sitting there, coffee gone cold, a small smile on his face. It wasn't the end of our story. But for the first time, it felt like the beginning of a better one. I found the photograph 2 days later, tucked behind one of Dad's old military plaques on the wall. It was small, faded, and bent at the corners, a black and white image of him with 3 other soldiers, all laughing. One of them was a woman. She stood in the middle, wearing the same uniform as the rest, her hand resting casually on Dad's shoulder. Her name tag read S. Turner. When I showed it to him, his expression changed. The color drained from his face. He took the picture from me carefully, like it was something fragile. Where did you find this? He asked. Behind your award, I said. Who is she? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. Sarah Turner. Captain Turner. She saved my life. I sat down beside him. What happened? He looked out the window, his voice low. I was a young lieutenant. Too eager, too reckless. We were pinned down during a mission in Kandahar. I gave a bad order, got one of our men trapped. She pulled him out. Got hit doing it. He paused. She didn't make it. My throat tightened. And you blamed yourself. He nodded. Every day since. I wrote her parents, visited them when I got back, but it never felt like enough. Her mother told me something I never forgot, that sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight when the war is over. I didn't understand what she meant, until I saw you in uniform. I blinked. You thought you'd lose me like you lost her. He nodded again, slowly. When I saw you wearing that dress at the wedding, confident, proud, alive, I saw her. And I panicked. I said something cruel because it was easier than admitting I was scared. The admission hit me like a punch to the chest. For years, I'd believed his anger came from disappointment. I never realized it came from grief. I wish you'd told me, I said softly. I didn't know how, he said. Every time I looked at you, I saw every mistake I ever made. You were my second chance, and I ruined it. The quiet between us felt heavy, but not hopeless. I reached over, touching his hand. You didn't ruin it. You just took a while to show up. He looked at me, eyes glassy. You really forgive me that easily? It's not easy, I said. But holding on hurts more. He smiled faintly, the first real smile in days. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a small, worn dog tag on a thin chain. This was hers, he said. Sarah Turner. I've carried it for 30 years. But I think it's time someone else held onto it. He placed it in my palm. The metal was cool, the engraving still sharp. It felt like a piece of history and of him. Why me? I asked. Because you carry the same kind of courage she did, he said quietly. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. Tears blurred my vision as I clasped the tag in my hand. Thank you, I whispered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the tag on my nightstand, its faint reflection catching the moonlight. I thought about Sarah Turner, a woman I'd never met but somehow owed everything to. And I thought about my father, the man who'd built walls. How'd he take it? He said he always knew you were the brave one. I laughed softly, shaking my head. He's not wrong. He chuckled too, a low, honest sound. Then he looked at me, eyes soft. Emily, I spent years teaching people how to fight. You taught me how to stop. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of chimes from next door. For the first time, it didn't feel like silence between us. It felt like peace. But deep down, I knew there was still one last thing I had to do, not for him, but for me. It was time to visit Sarah Turner's grave. The cemetery was quiet that morning, wrapped in a pale fog that softened the edges of everything. Dew clung to the grass, catching the first light of day like tiny shards of glass. I parked by the gate, the air sharp with the smell of rain and pine. Dad hadn't wanted to come. He said some things had to be faced alone, but I knew this was something I needed to do, both for him and for myself. I found her grave near the back, a small, flat stone marked simply, Captain Sarah Turner, United States Army 1982 to 2008. Someone had left fresh lilies there, white against the gray stone. I knelt down, brushing away a few fallen leaves. For a moment, I just stared at the name, trying to imagine her face beyond the faded photograph I'd seen. "Hi," I whispered. "I'm Emily. I think we've been connected for a long time." The words came easier than I expected. "My dad, Colonel Reeves, he told me what you did for him. How you saved his life. I think that moment defined both of you. It made him the man I grew up with, hard, guarded, too proud to say when he was hurting. But I think it also made him the man he's trying to become now. So, thank you. For saving him. For giving him the chance to finally make things right." A breeze moved through the trees, gentle and warm. The kind of wind that feels like a reply. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the dog tag he'd given me. I turned it over in my hand, reading the name again. Sarah Turner. "I don't think you meant for him to carry your guilt all these years," I said softly. "But he did. And I think you'd be proud to know that the person you saved has finally learned how to live again." I placed the tag gently at the base of the headstone. "You can rest now. He's okay." For a long while, I stayed there, listening to the wind, the distant hum of the world beyond the gates. I thought about the way people's lives intertwine without ever meeting. How one act of courage can ripple through generations. When I finally stood, I felt lighter. Like I'd left part of that weight there with her. As I turned to leave, I saw a man standing a few rows over, head bowed, hands clasped. He looked up and gave me a nod. I recognized the insignia on his jacket, Special Forces. Another one of hers, maybe. He walked over slowly. "You Reeves' daughter?" he asked. "Yes," I said, surprised. "You knew my father?" "Knew her," he said, glancing down at the grave. "Served under her command. She talked about him sometimes. Said he reminded her of why she joined. Said if anything ever happened to her, she hoped he'd find peace." I swallowed hard. "She said that?" He nodded. "Yeah." She called him the stubborn one. That made me smile through the tears. "That's him." He smiled too. "Tell him she'd be proud." "And so am I." He gave a small salute before walking away, disappearing into the mist. I stood there, frozen for a moment, before whispering to the air, "I'll tell him." When I got back home, Dad was sitting on the porch again, just like always. When he saw my face, he didn't ask what happened. He just nodded, like he already knew. "I left her tag there," I said. "She's at peace now." He nodded again, eyes glistening. "Good. That's where it belongs." For a while, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was full of understanding, two lives finally untangled from decades of pain. As the sun dipped below the trees, he reached into his jacket and handed me something new, a patch, the same as his, but with a single word stitched beneath the eagle. "Courage." "She would have wanted you to have this," he said. I held it in my palm, feeling the weight of it, not heavy, but grounding. "Thanks, Dad," I whispered. He smiled softly. "You earned it." That night, for the first time, I didn't dream about the past. I dreamed of peace. Of my mother's laughter, Sarah's bravery, and my father's quiet voice saying, "You did good, kid." And for the first time, I believed him. The Veterans Center sat at the edge of town, a squat brick building with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that read Reeves Family Resource Center. It used to be a storage depot, but over the last few weeks, Dad and I had been quietly turning it into something new, a place for soldiers and families who didn't have anywhere else to go. He called it a new kind of mission. That morning, we arrived early, carrying boxes of books and old uniforms for display. The air smelled like dust and coffee. Dad unlocked the front door and stepped aside, letting me walk in first. "Feels different," I said, taking it all in, the soft light from the windows, the bulletin boards waiting to be filled with stories and photos. He nodded. "Yeah, feels like purpose." For a man who had spent decades barking orders, there was something gentle about the way he moved now. He didn't pace or correct or command. He just was. We spent the day arranging chairs, setting up the small coffee station, and hanging pictures of soldiers, men and women from every branch, every decade. Somewhere between the hammering and the laughter, I realized we weren't just building a space. We were rebuilding us. Around noon, Liam showed up, still wearing that quiet smile of his. "Heard you two were putting together something special," he said. "Thought I'd lend a hand." Dad gave him a firm handshake. "Could use all the help we can get." For a moment, the two men just looked at each other, 2 generations of service, bound by what they'd lost and what they'd learned to forgive. By evening, the place looked alive. A few veterans from Dad's old unit stopped by, bringing old photos and stories. One of them, a gray-haired sergeant named Cole, clapped Dad on the back and said, "Never thought I'd see the day you opened your doors, Tom." Dad smiled. "Guess even old soldiers can learn new tricks." Laughter rippled through the room. I stood by the window, watching them share stories, the sound of their voices weaving through the space like something sacred. Later, when everyone had left, I found Dad sitting alone at one of the folding tables. The sunset poured through the windows, painting everything in shades of amber. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Just thinking about how many years I wasted being angry." I sat across from him. "You can't get those years back, Dad. But you're making new ones count." He looked up, eyes soft. "You really believe that?" "I do," I said. "And I think Mom would too." That made him smile. "Your mother always said I'd need you to teach me how to live someday." "She was right," I said, smiling back. He laughed quietly. "Yeah, she usually was." We locked up the center as the last light faded. On the door, Dad taped a small sign we'd written together, a place for those still fighting the quiet wars. He stood back, reading it. "You know, he said, for the first time, I think I understand what pride really feels like." I looked at him, curious. "What do you mean?" "It's not medals. Or rank. Or obedience," he said. "It's watching your kid become someone you wish you'd been brave enough to be." The words caught in my throat. All the years of wanting to hear something like that, suddenly, it was here, simple and real. I stepped forward and hugged him. He stiffened for a moment, then hugged me back. His arms were strong, familiar, safe. When I pulled away, I said quietly, "I think you were always brave, Dad. You just forgot." He smiled at that, the kind of smile that felt like peace. As we walked to the car, the streetlights flickered on. The wind carried the faint sound of the flag rustling above the center's door. And for the first time in my life, I didn't see my father as a soldier trying to win a war. I saw him as a man who had finally laid down his weapons. The opening day of the Reeves Family Resource Center felt like the start of a new chapter, not just for the veterans gathering outside, but for us. The air was crisp and bright, the flag out front swaying gently in the morning wind. A small crowd had formed, old soldiers in faded uniforms, young families, reporters, and volunteers. Dad stood at the entrance, his posture straight but relaxed, his medals polished, his expression softer than I'd ever seen. He looked every bit the man he used to be, only lighter now, as if the weight of the past had finally slid off his shoulders. He cleared his throat and stepped up to the small podium. "I've spent most of my life wearing this uniform," he began, voice carrying across the crowd. "It taught me discipline. It taught me courage. But it also taught me how easy it is to build walls, even around the people you love. He paused, glancing toward me. For years, I thought protecting my family meant making them strong. What I didn't understand is that strength doesn't come from shutting people out. It comes from letting them in. The crowd was silent, every face turned toward him. He looked back down at his notes, then smiled faintly. This center is for the ones who come home still fighting, for the families who hold them together, and for the daughters who remind stubborn old soldiers like me that love is the bravest kind of battle. His voice broke slightly on the last line, and my eyes burned. People clapped, softly at first, then louder, until the entire crowd was on its feet. After the ceremony, he found me near the coffee table, trying not to cry. "You gave a good speech," I said, wiping my eyes. He smiled. "You inspired it." We walked outside together as people filtered through the doors. Veterans shared stories over donuts and coffee, some smiling, some crying, all of them finding something they didn't know they'd been missing. Dad and I sat on the bench under the flagpole, the same one where we'd first talked about this idea. He took a deep breath. I used to think life after service was the hardest thing I'd ever face. Turns out, it's learning how to forgive yourself. I leaned against him gently. "And?" He smiled. "I'm getting there." A young boy ran past us, laughing, chasing a paper flag. His mother called after him, laughing too. Dad watched them go, his eyes soft with something I'd never seen before: peace. He turned to me. "You're still wearing that patch?" I touched the small fabric on my jacket, the one that read courage. "Every day." He nodded approvingly. "Good. That's the one worth earning." The wind picked up, rustling the trees, and for a moment, I could almost feel Mom's presence there, quiet, proud, whole. I took his hand. "Dad?" "Yeah, I think Sarah Turner would be proud too." He looked at me, eyes glistening, and for once, he didn't try to hide it. Then I finally did something right. We sat there, hand in hand, as the flag flapped gently above us, its shadow dancing across our shoes. It struck me then, redemption doesn't come all at once. It comes in moments like this, a shared silence, a forgiven word, a second chance finally taken. The ceremony faded, the crowd dispersed, but we stayed. The sun began to set, golden light spilling across the center's walls. Dad stood slowly, straightening his jacket, and turned toward the building one last time. "Ready, Lieutenant," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. I smiled. "Always, Colonel." We walked back toward the doors together, side by side, no ranks, no walls, just a father and daughter who'd finally learned how to stand on the same ground. And as the doors closed behind us, the words on the sign outside caught the last light of day, for those still fighting the quiet wars, and the families who bring them home. That was the moment I knew our story wasn't about battle or loss. It was about love, the kind that survives, heals, and finally finds its way home.